It is December 1927, with Christmas wishes and good cheer to all, and yet they did it. They really went and did it. They shot Santa Claus. The 1927 Christmas edition of the Daily Alaska Empire said it all. Masked Santa Claus tries bank robbery. And that's when a story that could have been quirky and even jolly turned violent. It was subtitled, "Leads 4 companions in raid, 1 officer is killed." With that, we head to Cisco, Texas, on December 23rd, 1927. Only a couple weeks out since the Texas Bankers Association announced its $5,000 per dead bank robber reward that we just covered in the video, Bank Bandit Death Fund launched in Texas. Santa Claus and his 4 helpers hit the First National Bank in Cisco, killing 1 officer and wounding a minimum of 9 others. Shortly after noon, Santa Claus, watched by 2 little girls who remained on the sidewalk, entered the bank. He walked up to cashier Alex Spear and spoke to Spear in a, quote, mumbling tone, end quote. So Spear asked him to repeat himself, at which point Santa pulled a revolver and commanded Spear to, quote, reach for some sky, end quote, as the cashier raised his hands. Simultaneously, 4 other bandits lined up bank officials and employees and then scooped up all the cash. Meanwhile, a woman bolted out a side door and called out for police. The robbers then used 2 men as human shields so they could exit the bank to reach the sidewalk in their 2 getaway cars. Worse yet, when the robbers got to the sidewalk, they grabbed 2 school children and dragged them to the cars, forcing them into the back seat, in part to screen bullets as the car sped away. 1 gang member went to one of the cars to start it. Then he was struck by at least 1 bullet and considered, quote, probably fatally, end quote, at the time. The remaining quartet of robbers returned fire and started shooting, focusing their aim at police and at random customers of the bank and pedestrians. Chief of Police G.E. Bedford engaged the robbers from the corner of a nearby alley and was struck 3 times and fell mortally wounded. Marion Olson, from the day when Marion was also a male name, think of John Wayne, whose first name was actually Marion. He was a Harvard University student and he was home for the Christmas break. Well, he was shot. The bandits even tried to force him into the getaway car, but since he was hit by friendly fire and presumably angry, he got out of the car, quote, in defiance, end quote, of the robbers. Alex Spears, the cashier, was struck in the jaw. George Carmichael, a 60-year-old police officer, was hit in the head. When Officer Carmichael fell, a citizen grabbed his firearm and ran at the robbers, firing. That sounds like it could have been R.L. Day. Day, a waiter, walked up to the bandit car and tried to fire into it, but his pistol had a misfire. He was either hurt from that or from a robber's bullet. That bit isn't clear. Bardley Boggs was hit and then broke his leg when he fell. Pete Rutherford was shot in the thigh by a stray bullet about a half a block away. And Oscar Cleette was shot while in the bank as a customer. The 4 robbers, 2 of whom were thought to have been wounded, hopped into their getaway car, executing an escape, but leaving the wounded robber behind to be captured. Shortly outside of town, they abandoned their escape vehicle and left the 2 school children, Laverne Comer, 12, and Emma Mae Robinson, 10, and thankfully they were unharmed. When the robbers abandoned the car, they ordered the girls to pass them the sack of money and told them to lie down so they couldn't see which way the robbers fled. The wounded man told captors his name was Lewis Davis, and posses immediately formed and gave chase, locating the car partially hidden a few miles outside of town. Lewis Davis, noted as L.E. Davis, but probably actually L.W. Davis, was quickly charged with murder and robbery with firearms and was taken to Fort Worth's jail in order, in part, to prevent mob violence, since a crowd had gathered around the hospital where Davis was under guard. And the loot? Well, somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000 in cash and either $15,000 or $150,000 in non-negotiable securities had been stolen, yet all was recovered. How? The children apparently gave the wrong sack to the bandits when ordered by them to throw the money bag from the car. Brutish bank robbers, with all of their incompetence, cold-heartedness, and violence, are just the type we follow on Decades of Gangsters, from 1926 until 1941, in U.S. involvement in World War II. Well, the four robbers were at large and were hunted by posses totaling somewhere between 500 and 1,000 men. Bloodhounds were being sent from Gatesville, Texas, and famed Ranger Captain Tom Hickman had even arrived that evening to investigate. Sheriff Abernathy led a posse into the fray, but accidentally shot himself in the hand and was taken to the hospital. A farm boy saw the car rushing back to town and flagged down a posse car, telling them that it was the robbers. Quote, an exciting chase followed, ending at the hospital, end quote. Meanwhile, the doctor told Davis he'd probably die. So Davis opened up and told the officers the names of the robbers. Those names were familiar to law enforcement and were all known to have criminal records according to information from Wichita Falls, where the robbers were known to live. At some point after abandoning the vehicle, the robbers tried to commandeer a second car. However, Woodrow Harris, the young son of Mrs. Ellis Harris of Rising Star, frustrated the attempt by either locking the gear shift or locking the doors, depending on the source. Well, 3 days later, the Brownsville Herald ran 3 arrested as suspects in Cisco case. It was subtitled, Trio Related to Dead Robber Are Caught at Wichita Falls, Alibi is Offered. The suspects said they were returning from a farm between Albany and Moran, where they'd gone on Sunday to get Mrs. Sam Fox. Mrs. Fox was the sister of Davis, and they were bringing her back to Wichita Falls for the funeral services for Davis, who had died in Fort Worth in the jail. 3 remaining robbers, they arrived in the South Bend area in Texas in a dilapidated car, but turned back when they saw a barricade across the road. The officers saw them turn around and instantly pursued, initiating a running gun battle. Well, the 3 robbers ended up arriving in and leaving their car in a pasture. The first man out of the car, Santa Claus, turned and fired on police who'd closed right up behind the bandit car. Buckshot brought him down, and he was shortly after taken back and identified as the gang leader. It seemed that he'd been wounded during the skirmish in Cisco during the heist's aftermath. He'd been struck in the leg. In fact, it was his blood and rags that were used to dress his wounds that provided the trail that posses had followed. The 2 remaining, quote, grizzled desperados, end quote, fled on foot, covering their retreat with returning sweeping gunfire as they egressed. A Carl Wiley, 22, Hugh Wiley, 22, or Claude Wiley, 23, was kidnapped Sunday morning. Quote, the robbers came to our place soon after midnight Sunday, saying they had a sick man and wanted to borrow a car, end quote. Wiley's father delayed them, but when the son got home, the robbers pulled their guns and made him go with them. The elder Wiley opened fire as the robbers left his farm about 1 a.m. that Sunday morning with his son and car. The evening of the 26th was spent in a pasture about 8 miles north of Cisco, and they, quote, nearly froze, end quote. One of the robbers even took the Wiley son's overcoat. On the morning of the 27th, the robbers drove into Cisco's city limits. One of the robbers scouted around until he found a Ford touring car, which they stole and headed northward, abandoning Wiley in Cisco. The Wiley son had been wounded, but told officers that the robbers didn't shoot him, but his father, R.C. Wiley, had fired at the bandits and accidentally struck him. Well, officers raided an oil camp near the Wiley home and arrested one man and two women. Later, a second man was arrested as well. They were taken to jail and held in Albany for investigation. All of their names were being withheld, but the man who was initially arrested with the two women turned out to be a Wichita Falls doctor and had a medicine case with him. The fugitive bandits even allegedly stayed at the oil camp on Sunday night, getting wounds for both men dressed. On the 28th, an airplane was put into play, piloted by Texas Ranger Sergeant M.T. Gonzalez, who would become a famed Texas character and was nicknamed El Lobo Solo, or Lone Wolf. He took off from Graham, Texas, to scout the area from the sky. The Rangers even brought in a couple of machine guns just in case. Late-night charges of accessory after the fact were filed. Dr. J.T. Vick, Mrs. Frances Heron, Mrs. Thornton of Wichita Falls, Sam Fox of Moran, and a Claude Edwards of Dickens comprised those arrested at the oil lease near Moran. By the 29th, G.W. Carmichael, Cisco police officer, with the bullet lodged in his brain, was still alive and even had a chance to recover. And we finally got names for the crew. Santa Claus actually turned out to be Marshall Ratliff, an ex-con who had allegedly donned the outfit since he might have been recognized in the area. He was currently at Graham, suffering from a total of 5 bullet wounds, though he was expected to live. The two remaining heretofore unnamed were thought to be Henry Helms and Jack Long, both ex-cons. Long had been sentenced on burglary charges from Dallas County and had been pardoned by Governor Miriam Ma Ferguson. We noted Ma's pardoning issues / corruption in relation to Red Calloway in the video Bank Bandit Trio of Titans Busted. Well, Helms had been convicted on bank robbery in Wichita County and had also been pardoned by Ma Ferguson. The pair was believed to still be in hiding near the Brazos River. Now, an R.M. Bobby Hill signed a confession on the night of December 30th in the presence of officers and newspapermen. But who the heck was he? Well, Henry Helms had talked about the holdup, but declined to make a written statement, while Marshall Ratliff said he'd sign one as soon as he was physically able. In fact, his mother, Mrs. Rills Ratliff, was there attending to her son. By process of elimination, R.M. Bobby Hill had to be Jack Long. Though he declined to write a statement, Helms said, quote, "Killing anybody was farthest from my heart," end quote, after he'd been roused from his pain by opiates. Helms added, quote, "When we shot in the bank, we just intended to scare people. We thought they would run," end quote. Well, an update showed that G.W. Carmichael, his health had turned badly and he was now expected to die. Sheriff G.W. Gig Abernathy, sheriff of Palo Pinto County, was declared in critical condition from the accidental firing of his sidearm. This accident was much worse than described earlier, since the bullet had actually entered his right leg, severing an artery. Well, we'll certainly follow up as more information becomes available on this bank robbery combine that ended up kidnapping, killed a police officer, and critically injured another, plus shot and wounded countless others. Oh, and they got no money. And all the robbers were shot. And one of them was killed. What a violent disaster. Not the most glowing Christmas memory. Well, heading west to Vaughn, New Mexico, and waving goodbye to Texas, we learn that roads were being guarded, hoping to capture 3 unmasked men who'd robbed the Citizens State Bank in that tiny town. As of print, the Douglas Daily Dispatch reported that the bandits were still roaming freely, with authorities focusing on the idea that the robbers were heading back into Texas. Yet further west into Arizona, we head with the Grand Rapids Herald-Review, used, I believe, for the first time, and its subtly titled story, Forrest Page Arrested. The United States Department of Justice in Phoenix, Arizona, reported that Forrest Page had been arrested there. Page had escaped from police in Duluth, Minnesota, as he was being taken to the county jail. He was wanted for obtaining money under false pretenses, and credit is due to his creativity. Page had deposited $20,000 into a Grand Rapids, Minnesota bank in the form of a draft on a Mexican bank. Then he started drawing money against it, which turned out to be a worthless deposit. And heading west to California, we meet up with another jailbreaker. The Imperial Valley Press ran alleged leader of jailbreak held by police. Bright McConnell, 26, was arrested in Los Angeles on December 9th. He allegedly engineered the, quote, wholesale jail delivery, end quote, or escape of 12 prisoners being held in the St. Clair County Jail in Belleville, Illinois. He was apparently out on bond at the time of the jailbreak, awaiting his own trial for bank robbery. Staying in LA and remaining with the Imperial Valley Press, we see that bank clerks confess crime. The pair, William E. Hayes, 25, and Lee Grossman, 23, both from Los Angeles, were actually arrested in Chicago, Illinois, where they confessed to embezzling $50,000 from the Security Trust and Savings Bank of Los Angeles. It seemed they'd slowly bled the bank of cash over a 3-year period. Back in 1925, they both began work there, earning $90 per month. Shortly afterwards, they each met a girl, and here's where every man watching this may groan. The two boys realized their salaries were, quote, insufficient to keep up their social activities, end quote. They each later married the girls and, to no one's shock, found that household expenses were even higher than when they were just in courting. So naturally, they upped their monthly thievery to $300 per month. Down in San Diego, 3 bank bandits, quote, aided by a woman chauffeur, end quote, held up the University Avenue branch of the Security Commercial and Savings Bank. The heist occurred just before noon and netted the thieves about $4,500 in cash. True to the time period, the United Press leased wire pointed out that the 3 men, quote, one a Negro, end quote, forced the teller to hand over the loot. The woman getaway driver awaited at the wheel with the car running. Witnesses got the plate or tag number as it sped away, heading north to Los Angeles. Up by Sacramento in Davis, California, we learn that 2 masked men, described as heavily armed, held up the Bank of Davis at closing time on December 2nd. They were spotted heading for San Francisco with their $7,000 score. The robbery was described as methodical, suggesting to bank officials that the crime was well planned. And the Imperial Valley Press provided some details that the Douglas Daily Dispatch did not. Cashier Forrest Fizel was counting currency, and Fred Corolla, a 16-year-old customer, was standing in the lobby. J.A. Harvey, president of the bank, and his son Boyd were seated at Harvey's desk. The robbers, thought to be youths, bound the 4 with small cords and locked them in a small washroom before they escaped, which is why the alarm wasn't raised until an hour had elapsed. And that gets us started with December of 1927. We've got action on the East Coast, the Midwest, Mountain West, and even into Canada. Oklahoma, as usual, never disappoints, and we've got tons on that. And we'll end December once again back in Texas, and see the horrifying results of the Dead Bandit Death Fund. Hint, bad cops and greed will come into play.